the live stream now also has my voice in it, which it didn't have in 2 seconds ago. So that's perfect. But let me just start by introducing Michael, and then I will introduce some of the logistics, and we'll have Otto Barten as well join us to introduce their case. So first off, Michael Ehret is a senior research lead at Rethink Priorities, and he has previously been at the Future of Humanities Institute, and he is leading Rethink Priorities AI governance and long-term strategy research team, which is of course quite amazing. And Rethink Priorities is one of the largest effective altruist research organizations out there, and do a lot of work both in public and in secret. So very excited to hear what he has to talk about today, and maybe we'll hear some new tidbits from Rethink Priorities as well. But I'll let that be up to Michael. So give him a hand, and we'll see what you want to introduce us to.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for coming, everyone. Is everyone seeing a very dull-looking slide? Okay, cool. I take offense at that. So yeah, thanks for coming along, everyone. As been said, I do research management on an AI governance team. I do this from a sort of like existential risk / long-termist perspective, which I guess I can like get more to later. But I'm essentially especially focused on the extreme risks that could happen from AI, as well as the extreme benefits that could emerge if we handle this transition well, rather than just the things coming around the corner, which are also important by typical standards. So in this talk, I'm going to probably not have that much of like me talking or like just like a pre-prepared talk. A lot of time for Q&A, I think. I'm going to give a sort of intro to AI governance and AI risk, say a bit about what can be done about AI governance and AI risk, a couple examples from my team, and then like room for discussion and debate. So diving in, what is AI risk? Why might it matter? Why now? I imagine some of this will be recap for some of you. Some of it will be like wacky sci-fi stuff for some of you. I'm trying to pitch somewhere in the middle. We can debate it later. So firstly, I claim that transformative AI / artificial general intelligence seems very likely to be possible. By this, also this slide is going to like not fully justify all my claims. It gives like a sketch of an argument. Don't have time to fully justify all of this. Transformative AI means like something that's basically as big a deal as the Industrial Revolution. There's been very few things that big a deal. So this is like a very high bar. This is like society is like wildly changed and is as unrecognizable compared to today as like today is compared to before the steam engine. This includes possibilities where everyone dies. It also includes possibilities where like really good or really bad things are locked in forever, as well as a variety of other worlds. So some sort of just like big deal bar, kind of a fuzzy term. Artificial general intelligence is like something about as smart as humans across basically all dimensions, or smarter. All of these are like as big a deal as the Industrial Revolution or more, or like as smart as humans or more. So I claim this seems very likely possible. I can't really see a strong reason why there's no way you can arrange atoms that does this other than just like by giving birth to a human. Then, furthermore, there are multiple well-resourced groups that are actively pursuing the development of transformative artificial intelligence. Not just that this is like some interesting thing that like in theory could happen, but rather this seems to be something that people are driving towards strongly. Most notable are OpenAI and DeepMind, also perhaps Anthropic. There's also a bunch of other large tech companies with large AI labs that aren't pointing them explicitly at AGI, but are pointing them a bunch of like big deal AI stuff. They might later point at AGI. They might get it sort of by accident as they pursue other just advances. Furthermore, I would say that sooner or later, it seems to me likely that one of these groups will succeed. I don't think they're all just going to fail sort of for centuries. I think one of them is going to get there and develop this sort of AGI or a set of systems that collectively is AGI. I claim this seems plausible in the next 10 years. So not just very, very far away, but could happen like before I'm 40. So this is pretty weird. Likely, in my opinion, in the next 50 years. I think there's some people who believe it's like way sooner, and that also seems reasonable to me. I'm saying like plausible in the next 10. It could be, it could happen. It could be maybe even in the next 5. There's also some people who might see this at first as like pretty wild. But there's actually, yeah, there's been like a fair bit of research on this that seems to generally converge on roughly this sort of conclusion. Also, surveys of just mainstream ML people, machine learning people, seems to converge on roughly this conclusion. In particular, there was a survey by Katja Grace and a bunch of colleagues, which I didn't include a link to, but you can find it, Katja Grace survey, machine learning. I'm sure you'll get there. AI impacts. Someone could put a link in the, I'm sure someone knows what I'm talking about. So this is not just, you know, they like, I don't want to just say defer to experts, but I think there's like object level reasons to believe that this is true. And then also relevant experts seem to believe this is true, just the probably part. It's not that it's definitely in the next 50 years. I furthermore claim it seems plausible this will lead to an existentially catastrophic accident, misuse, or other consequences. I'm just saying plausible. I really don't know how likely it is. I feel like it's reasonable to believe anywhere from like 1% to 90% or something chance that within the next 100 years, we get an existential catastrophe due to AI. In that range seems kind of reasonable to me. You could maybe argue for below or above that range. By existential catastrophe, I mean something that's like extinction or about as bad as extinction, permanently cutting off the things that the vast majority of what could have been achieved in the universe. This could happen by accident, which means like the system itself screws up from our perspective, maybe it achieves amazing things from its perspective, and then we have this lock-in. It could be misused by humans. It could be other consequences. There's like weirder scenarios that I won't really bother getting into. These are sometimes called structural risks, or you get what you measure, or what failure looks like. These are things people can Google if they're interested. But that one's sort of messier. The two most obvious ones are like, imagine some human uses this in a really bad way, or imagine the AI system has goals different from our goals and is very, very, very good at achieving those goals. We won't want it to achieve the maximum amount of those goals because they're different from our goals, and that gets in the way of what we're trying to do. Now we have a situation where we have a new species that is in opposition to us if it's capable enough. So this could plausibly go very, very badly. Could also definitely go great. Could be the best thing that ever happened. I want to like move us from that world to that world, or yeah, build a field that can collectively do that. I furthermore claim that the easiest path to TAI/AGI seems to be unsafe. I think the best single piece making this case is called something like, without specific countermeasures, the path to AGI involves takeover. It's called something like that. It's by a researcher called Ajay Kotra, and it just spells out that sort of if you extrapolate forward from the sort of techniques that are being used now, and you imagine what a sort of like naive, decently short-sighted, like a standard company, profit maximizing company would do, Ajay Kotra argues that this just like by default leads to takeover by the AGI. So like the AI takes over, gains control of the world. I know this sounds pretty sci-fi. But when you sketch out the argument, it does sort of seem like this follows. This doesn't mean that this is guaranteed. It means like by default. So we need something more than just the company's standard, like normal corporate responsibility levels. We need like a higher bar, possibly via regulation, possibly by the corporations being extraordinarily nice, possibly by the ML community being like, we're going to boycott anyone who's building something incredibly dangerous in an inappropriate way, and we're not going to work for you. There's various methods to get here, but it's just like, we don't want to just sleepwalk into this. The default path seems very bad, I claim. Okay, cool. Also, there'll be a time for you to debate me soon. You can also debate me in the direction of saying I should sound way more confident about all this if you want. Next, what is AI governance? So one way of defining it is work to understand and or positively influence current or future local and global norms, policies, laws, processes, politics, and institutions, not just governments. It will affect social outcomes from the development and deployment of AI systems. Now that's quite a mouthful. I'm aware of that. So one way of putting this is sort of like, there's a bunch of actors that are relevant to how AI is going to go. The AI companies, the tech firms that house them sometimes, the investors, the entrepreneurs, the people working for these companies, governments, international organizations, philanthropists, a wide range, the public, a wide range of actors have some say on this. How can we make it so that they behave in ways that help us all not die, and furthermore, also get to a wonderful future, and not some sort of locked-in future that's way less good than what we could have gotten. Even if we're still alive, it's still much less good than what we could have achieved. But not via technical AI safety work, which is also very important. I believe there's another alignment jam on that, but that's not what we're doing here. We're doing like all the rest of it. Like, how do we create the environment in which this stuff can all go very well? How do we like create the actors that will treat this well? How do we get actors to treat this well? A different way of putting this is sort of what I've done now, which is like a definition by exclusion. So what we're doing is not technical AI safety, not miscellaneously useful things like effective altruism community building or better forecasting methods, where the effective altruism community is a community that's unusually interested in this sort of thing. So when you build the AI community, you're sort of indirectly helping with AI risk. Better forecasting methods can also indirectly help with AI risk. We're not talking about that. We're talking about pretty much everything else, though, that aims to make the development of very advanced AI go well. Examples will also help, because that's all pretty abstract. And if you're like, that sounds very broad, yes, it is very broad. This problem is, like, in my opinion, the like most important thing going on this century. And people are going to increasingly notice this. There's going to be many relevant players. There's going to be many relevant actions taken. There's a lot of work to be done from a lot of angles in order to have this go well. It's not just like talk to this one person and have them do this one thing, sorted. So furthermore, like spelling out a bit more of what it is and then getting into why it might matter and why it might matter now, not just like we can deal with it later. I think it's useful to think of AI governance as a sort of like continuum or pipeline from foundational work to applied work, where the foundational work is, so it's on the sort of strategy side. You might be looking into things like how big a deal is AI accident risk versus AI misuse risk. So how much should be focused on controlling which humans have access to this thing and how they can use it versus controlling whether the AI system itself has its own distinct goals and is able to optimize for them in a way that means takeover of control from humanity, or something like how good is it if companies are in control of this versus governments being in control of this? How valuable or disvaluable would it be to slow down AI progress? How fast will AI progress be? What types of systems we'll be dealing with? Will it basically be the same sort of thing we've currently got, like large language models, but just scaled up a hell of a lot? Or will it be something very different? So that's the strategy end, very big picture. Then you move along to tactics research, which would be something like, okay, so we've concluded that slowing down AI R&D seems to be good. How does one do that? Like, what are the levers available for slowing down AI progress? Or something like, how can we make it that we have governments being more responsible with regards to this? So maybe we believe that government competence on this issue is good. Maybe we don't, but maybe we believe that. And then how can we actually make this happen? Policy development, turning some like abstract lever for slowing down AI progress, for example, into a concrete action that could be taken by a government or a lab or a philanthropist or someone. And you advocate for it, then you actually implement it. So you could, for example, work in a government or in a lab, in a grant-making body to actually like pull the trigger on some of these things. Everything along this pipeline can fit in the sort of AI governance bucket. There's room for a lot of types of people. Feeding into this bucket is field building. So this is coming from like the bottom. I'm not raising the roof. I'm saying like going up into the pipeline, we have people who are getting more people to care about this, or like making more people aware of this and like offering them, hey, maybe you could care about this if you want. Helping them figure out where they can fit in this, helping them skill up, helping them gain connections, this sort of thing. This diagram is taken from a forum post that I've got linked here. So there's many types, as I've sort of touched on, there's many types of decision makers, decisions, disciplines, and work that are relevant. Like a whole bunch of fields that one could come from are relevant to this. A whole bunch of types of work one can do are relevant to this. Still, most things are like hardly helping, and like you definitely should be prioritizing, and you should be like thinking, oh, in my opinion, you definitely should be thinking explicitly about like, how can I best fit into this story if you want to fit into this story? Like if you want to help the most you can, thinking explicitly about how to do that is really, really helpful. Still, the range of options is then decently broad. Once you've like filtered down to the things that really matter, you're still left with like 100 pretty different types of things you can do. It's a big problem. Yeah, unfortunately, so far, there's only about 100 people working on this with an existential risk focus. So it's tiny. And I mean the governance piece. There's something like 300 doing the technical AI safety thing. with an existential risk focus, like focus on the extreme stuff and the very advanced systems. Only about 100 doing both governance research and the sort of like implementation. So this is like for that whole pipeline and for both research and action, it's something like 100 people. There's like several independent estimates that all converge on that. One is by 80,000 hours. The other two are non-public. So that's not good. I don't like that. One example is like about 3 years ago, I was a high school teacher, and now I'm co-leading a team that's about 10% of the field. This is not how a sane world would handle this. Like there should be a much higher bar to be in my job, but there isn't. The field's tiny, so I'm keen to have more great people. And this is all partly about improving our ability to make good decisions later. So it's all partly also, it's not just about improving what decision makers do in the next year. It's also about like building a community that has expertise and connections. And when we get to a more urgent period where we're like close to the deadline and it's clearer what the shape of everything is, we can then act. Because right now it's like pretty hard to say what's most useful because the key moments are probably coming a little while from now, something like 5 to 50 years from now. Okay, and a last little bit in this chunk, and then I'll pause for some questions or debate or whatever, is it's worth noting that I have in mind, as I've mentioned, something, you could call it a few different things, but like long-termism aligned AI governance, or AI governance focused on extreme risks, or like existential risk AI governance. Basically, I'm focused on how to make it not go really, really bad, and maybe also how to make it go really, really well, which mostly is about what happens a little bit further from now. There's a lot of people doing relevant things, but without that lens. They're focused on a variety of other issues that are already with us today, or other issues that are coming up, but not the extreme risk thing, not the like, it's like everyone dying. That work is still relevant. I don't mean to be dismissive. This work will often be valuable and will often be worth interacting with. These communities are worth engaging with. But I believe it'll also miss a lot of really important things, and in some cases could be harmful, because in general, I don't think this should be a very controversial claim. It's pretty much, if you're doing X, like if you're trying to do X, you're not going to do a great job at Y because you're not trying to do Y. And you might sometimes do things that are harmful for Y because you're operating, in this case, they're operating in the same general space. But pretty much it's worth talking to those people. But the reason I focus on the 100 number rather than the other, like the 100 number of people, rather than the bigger fields that are also working on this, is because I do think focusing on these issues explicitly is helpful. I wanted to mention this in particular in this talk because you're about to do a hackathon-y thing. I think the most likely way that your projects would turn out to not be very useful in themselves or as like a learning thing is just like you don't choose something that is actually very relevant to the problem at hand. You choose something that's it sounds like it's in the general AI risk bucket, but it isn't like directly targeting the heart of like this specific narrow problem that I believe is like the highest stakes on the margin. Or you choose something like the project itself that someone's given you is good, but like the scope isn't quite right. It's sometimes hard and subtle to like aim it really in a particularly useful direction. But I think that's a solvable problem. It's just worth being mindful of it. Okay, there's other things that I have like a second half of like concrete actions, but I'm going to pause now for like questions, counterpoints, scoffs of disbelief.
Wonderful, yeah. And Sabrina can also grab a couple of the messages if she wants to join the stage too. Otherwise, I have a few points in here, and then we can probably jump on when people have questions. I think there's also Chris Lawrence.
Hi. So I think my question is about the funnel. When you say that there's only about 100 people working on this worldwide, I see from the other end a lot of people who are interested in contributing meaningfully to both governance and technical AI safety. And, you know, a lot of them, like the Blue Dot Impact latest course, had a 5-to-1 application to acceptance ratio. So I guess my question is, where are things going wrong in the funnel that we're not helping people do this more effectively?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a good question. So I can't remember how clear I made it, but I meant the 100 is like, yes, 100 people like professionally working on this. So they have like a job or grant or something where like this is sort of their focus. It's very hard to operationalize that. Because, for example, there's some people who like they're at an AI lab or they're in the US government and they're not like paid to focus on this, but they do have a job that's very relevant and they do themselves sort of focus on this. So I count them. But yeah, anyway, your question is relevant. one thing is there's not like a huge number of people in the funnel, like in the early part of the funnel. For example, I guess there's less than 1,000 people who are like early stage, and like this is like one of their 2 top career options or something, and they're taking like serious steps towards it. I don't know what the number would be. Maybe something like 500. I think like the organization 80,000 hours might have a good sense of what the number would be. And it is so that then like what would be really worrying is it about the funnel would be if there was like 500 people and then they were all just hanging around forever. I do think they are entering. Like 100 is bigger than it used to be. Like the 100 people professionally working on this, it has grown a fair bit. It is still growing. I'll have to like update this number in a year. I think the rate at which it grows is like kind of okay. I guess just in general, it's kind of hard to like upskill people and vet them and get them into relevant roles, build organizations and institutions. If someone does come in and they're great at like management or something, there's like various ways that can be helpful. Also, if someone's great at like distillation, so like taking a bunch of work and summarizing it to help junior people get up to speed, that's also really helpful. One thing is like this space is kind of confusing to orient to. That's part of why I do things like this. Yeah, that was a kind of vague answer, but I have talked for too long, so I'll stop now.
It was good, thank you.
Nice. I guess like a short follow-up. When you speak of this narrow problem, which is very focused on avoiding the catastrophic risks, then how do you see people outside of these 100 people contributing? Like I'm thinking academia, policymakers, people who might join these hackathons, for example.
Mm-hmm. Well, so to be clear, you can do the existential risk focused stuff in any of those institutions. So that work can be done within academia. It doesn't have to be done at like an effective altruism organization. It can be done in all sorts of places, including when it's not like your job description. But you're like you take the opportunities here and there to like nudge things in the right direction. People who are in other institutions, but so do you mean things like when someone isn't themselves focused on existential risk? How might they turn out to be helpful? Or do you mean if someone is focused on it, but they don't yet have a relevant job?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, looking at if you are outside of this, then what would be your strategy for pushing it towards a direction that would make more sense in this catastrophic risks category?
Yeah, I think roughly. So I'll try to give a brief answer, and then like the second half of the talk, we'll like say more on this and like have some links. Basically, like trying to like learn a bunch about the space, and I'll like share some resources on like where you can learn about the space. Trying to like talk to a bunch of people in the space, I'll share some resources on that. Applying for like a crap load of like jobs and grants and things like that, and seeing what happens. Just like throwing out a lot of applications and seeing what comes back. That's not relevant to everyone. Like maybe you have a job you should stay in and just like pivot the nature of your job. But for many people, that's great. I think, to be honest, those are the main things, and then like take it from there. And like think, like just try to like sit down and think strategically about what is the roles that are best to fill that I am plausibly a good fit for. What are the ways I can test my fit for them? What are the first steps? And then execute. Okay, I think I'll take like one-ish more question now, and then I'll go to the second half and a little bit more questions.
That sounds perfect.
So I usually consider myself an optimist, but this is one exception. And just hearing about the different institutions and categories and things like that, I'm trying to come up with a good analogy that we see today where this works. So for instance, I don't know, I was thinking like pharmacology or medicine, how we have a lot of, there's clinical trials and there's a lot of stops before a certain technology comes out. But there's still a lot of corruption in the pharmaceutical industry. Or for like veganism, for instance, like there's a lot of grassroots initiatives to stop harmful animal farming and things like that, but it still happens. And I'm just thinking like we can try as much as we want in these different institutions to try to slow it down and stop it. But as you said, like the benefits, even though there is like just as huge catastrophic consequences, the benefits are just too high to not incentivize people to keep going for it. So the way I see it is that it turns out into some sort of Cold War scenario where it's like people will say that they're trying to hinder it, but in secret in the closet, they're actually working on it without these limitations, because being the first to get to the finish point would just be like too high in order to like not do it. So if we were in like a Cold War race with China, for instance, like you know, well, I'm from Canada, but like if you know Canada against China, like oh, like Canada would be so nice and like oh we're gonna implement all these safety measures, and then China's just like go go go, you know, like how maybe you'll talk about this later on, but I'm just thinking like it has to be like a worldwide like global initiative type of thing, right?
I think it's a good question. I think there's more options. I think that there's a wider space of ways to tackle the problem, and also like a wider space of ways to frame the problem. But I think it's a good question. I think that my next like 2 slides are like quite relevant to that, and then I'll try to remember to like explicitly touch back on this. So I'm going to use that as like an audience plant segue, and like roll on now. Thanks. So what should AI strategy, governance, and policy maybe aim for? Here's a like non-exhaustive list of possibilities. So I'm not saying like these are all definitely good, and these are definitely not all the plausibly good things. But these are some like salient things that are like decently likely to be good. First, the AI strategy, governance, policy people can try to get there to be more technical AI safety work. So they're not doing it themselves. That's like one of the things I specifically rule out as like by definition. But they can like try to get it funded, or they can try to like promote relevant messages in the media. They could try to like run programs. They can try to like get it to be mandated that a certain amount of this be done by certain companies or whatever. So they can try various other things to engineer an environment in which people do useful technical AI safety work. They can also work on evaluations and auditing. So ways of testing AI systems to check how risky they are and how safe they are. For example, like, do they have very dangerous capabilities? And also, like, how likely are they to be misaligned from what humanity would want, like from human values, and like be operating under their own goals? You can then use these evaluations to like have a lab just themselves decide, oh, let's not launch this, maybe it's going to kill everyone. Or you could have it be that the labs have like agreed to some code of conduct in which like if the evaluations say a certain thing, they then don't launch it because it might kill everyone. Or it could be like in regulation or in a treaty or something like that. Once you have the measures, there's various ways of like using them. You could have labs coordinate and self-regulate in order to do good things, like a variety of good things, whatever good thing you want them to do. You might want to like make sure that they can coordinate and self-regulate. You can work on domestic laws and regulations. So instead of just relying on the labs to play nice, and you actually like put some teeth on it. International governance institutions, for example, a treaty, for example, just a like memorandum of understanding type thing between a couple countries. I think that's not quite the term. Or something like setting up a new body. So there's something called the International Atomic Energy Agency that helps with nuclear non-proliferation and helps like prevent there being loads of states with nuclear weapons. You could set up a similar, one could in theory set up a similar thing for AI to help with that. Some more things. You could have maybe, these two are kind of dicey. You might want it to be that safety conscious AI labs sustain or increase their leadership in AI capabilities. Because you might want there to be a narrow set of organizations that are like ahead by a significant margin, and also they're the ones who are like specifically responsible, like especially responsible, in order to not have a really tight race and to not have some like crazy reckless wild card leading the pack. Downside is like faster progress is risky. A very related and also risky thing is like trying to have a single country or block sustain or increase its leadership in AI capabilities. So for example, in October, there was like major export controls by the US on China on their ability to acquire AI compute, which is like the sort of like hardware and chips that are used to run, to do big AI training runs. So they're pretty much needed in order to do very advanced AI development. It might end up being the case that China just has a way harder time doing this. And then then all you need in theory, maybe, is US regulation, rather than needing both US and China regulation. Maybe. It's very unclear whether this was good or bad, but like it could have that positive effect, maybe. You could do compute governance to support other goals. Like this is related. You could try to influence who has AI compute, how much compute there is, whether we know where it is, whether we can constrain how it's being used. This can then allow you to do regulations and treaties and stuff like that, so that like if you can detect something's being used wrong, you can then enforce your treaty. Monitoring of AI R&D, monitoring of compliance with regulation, monitoring of AI activity in order to support all the other goals, like ways of just tracking what's being done in the same ways we have ways of tracking where nuclear fissile material is. better international relations and reduce conflict risk seems like broadly helpful for making a bunch of other things go less awful. And maybe slowing down progress in AI capabilities in order to buy time for other goals. So let's like pump the brakes a little bit so that we have a bit more time to figure everything else out, maybe. So this hopefully gives a flavor of like, there are things one can do that might be good. These are like big picture ones. These aren't like concrete actions. Like you can't go out tomorrow and be like, okay, my plan for Saturday is to slow down AI progress. But this can like give you a sort of like big picture goal that you can then come up with like 20 actions that could be executed on, some of which will be harmful. Please be careful. There's a lot of downside risk in this area, but there are good things to do. More concretely, I'll try to give a couple examples from my team. So some things my team are working on. One is making a database of US AI policy ideas that could plausibly be implemented in the next 5 years, and that plausibly could be really good from an extreme risk perspective. So trying to like filter both the usefulness and for like tractability among mainstream policy audiences. This is just like a really kind of simple, obvious thing that can be done in order to facilitate other policymakers having an easier time figuring out what they should be pushing for, facilitate journalists having an easier time figuring out what messaging they should be pushing, things like that. Another thing is work to check how much China will be behind in AI progress via these compute export controls that were done, just to get a better understanding of to what extent is it still extremely crucial to coordinate carefully with China. Just generally having a better picture of like, where is most of the risk coming from? Like, where is most of the AI research development coming from? Helps in a diffuse way with a bunch of other, like informing a bunch of other actions. Another project is just organizing a conference of people working on AI strategy who usually don't talk to each other and develop their own thoughts separately in little caves for a year, and then we can like bring them together. We did this last year and it seemed pretty productive. One other concrete one, looking into like the feasibility of getting a US-China AI treaty that is like an actually like quite ambitious AI treaty and what the pathways to that would be. This seems very hard to do. It doesn't seem like a very tractable path, but it could be really good if it works. And so it's worth sort of like, I think it's worth checking how plausible it is and what's the best way to get there. I think I'll just leave it at that set of examples. Hopefully that gives a bit of a flavor. And then I'm gonna like rattle off a quick set of ways of like concrete next steps. I guess not literally next steps because you're hackathoning, but after the hackathon, ways you can learn. I think like the best single source for learning a bunch of stuff on this is the AGI Safety Fundamentals course, the governance track. I think it's a great curriculum. It's available in course form now and then, but also you can just use it as a reading list when the course isn't running. So you can go to that website and find that out. You can do research in various institutions. So some starting points are fellowships and internships. So this comes back to the pipeline question. Some ways to go from like the 500 people who are kind of interested to like more professionals in this field, which I'm really excited about, is internships and fellowships at organizations like this. I'll probably share my slides somehow with the group afterwards. You can build things. You can like not just do research, but like make things happen. So for example, starting a university community, there's also some, or like whatever, whoever you're around, whatever people you have a great network with, you can try to see if there's a way you can like get some of them excited about these ideas. There are ways this can backfire, so be careful, but like, yeah, trying to have a go at that in sensible ways that aren't like promoting things in silly ways. But also entrepreneurship. There's some, for example, you could start an auditing org and provide third-party auditing to check how safe the AI systems are. There's loads of things. There's room for like policymakers, there's room for journalists, all sorts. This slide, it will also be in the set of slides I share out. Feel free to like take a screenshot now or whatever. Just like 4 handy links for people who are getting started in this field. Yep. Okay, I think that's, yes, that is my final slide. I think we have 10-ish minutes for questions.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And let's just give him a hand. I know there's, it'll only be from our little microphone since the others are muted. But thank you so much, Michael. I also have a couple questions here. So I'm curious, you speak of like long-termism, you speak of there's like 100 people, quite a constrained community or such. But at the same time, I mean, the changes are happening so quickly. You say 10 years, right? That is it like, can we say long-termism? Should it be another word, or like uncontrollable AI or something like this? And are we already seeing some of the risks that that you would expect in the 10-year time case with things like GPT-4. I mean, we just had the Microsoft researchers who had early access to GPT-4 release their massive sparks of AGI, or what it was called, on like some of the risks and some of the indications that it was, that there's a possibility. It's already scary. And how do you see that, like the longer term strategy, 10 years ish, and the current strategies?
Yeah. Okay. So one thing is, I think long-termism is probably a useful label, and I definitely am a big fan of it as a philosophy. But the label can be misleading. So the point isn't that we act directly on events that happen ages from now. It's more like the reason we take these actions is because we care about people whenever they are. We being like me and some other people around me. About people whenever they are, in the same way as I care about people in Africa with malaria just as much as someone in America with malaria, which there aren't really many of anymore. So that therefore we do the malaria nets in Africa because they're a neglected population. Same way the far future is like a very, very neglected population. But the way to help them is to help with I think the best ways to help them are to help the things in the coming decades that could preemptively mean they never exist. Yeah, so this does also then mean that you don't have to be a long-termist to care about this stuff. I think a significant chunk of the people working on extreme, so this is why I've used a few different labels at different times. I've sometimes said extreme risk, sometimes said existential risk, sometimes said long-termism. You can be motivated just by wanting to care about the current generation, maybe even just like you and your country. You don't even have to care about the whole world necessarily. In order to think that this is a very pressing issue that is one of the best things for you to work on. You can also care about just catastrophic risk of just 100 million dead plus, and not especially care about extinction. And then that still helps you that still points you towards some of what I think is most important. But I do think that's a big difference from just focusing on the things right in front of us. I think another thing is just a lot of people just aren't looking very far ahead, and also are focused that they don't consider low probability, high stakes scenarios. So a lot of it isn't really about the fact that I care about the long-term future. It's partly just about the fact that I'm the sort of person who's well, a 2% chance of dying, still really bad, as opposed to being it's just 2%, oh, that sounds kind of weird or something. That's maybe that sounds arrogant or something. That's how I would frame it. Obviously, there's two sides to every story. And I'd have to give a more detailed thing. Also, the other part of, I think, your question was things are getting interesting just lately, with GPT-4 and stuff. I think this is much more in the public consciousness than it used to be. I still think almost everyone thinking about it in the public isn't thinking about the extinction level things, or at least doesn't have a detailed understanding of what would cause that, which is fine, of course. They're the public, they're very busy. There's loads of things they have to think about. They're not specialists. But yeah, it will increasingly be the case that we can push for this actions with just mainstream messages of hey, this is terrifying for you and your family. But again, be careful. There's ways that can backfire. Okay, that's all I'll say on that.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think, we also see the CEO of OpenAI coming out with his Path to AGI blog posts and things like this, where they actually do mention these longer term risks as well from their own technology. And then you see sort of the more, the different vibe in public interviews and such. But Hiram, you have a question as well, so I'll pass to you.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was a really nice overview of the field. I think my question is when you're talking with policymakers, wouldn't it be a little impossible to kind of sell an existential risk reduction policy to them, which is kind of a little intangible, rather than say a misuse of AI, which would actually get some traction among policymakers, because it's easier for them to sort of explain to their electorate why they're working on this. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think that I think it would be silly to think that we can just talk to all policymakers and be hey, just say what I said in this talk with no more padding, caveats or details or footnotes or whatever, and assume that most of them are going to be oh, okay, good point. I'm going to now pivot a bunch of my taxpayers' dollars towards this, or like do a thing that's against some like powerful company with lobbyists' interests. I think it would also be silly to think that no policymakers are going to go for this, or that if you have like cumulative 20 hours over many different conversations and you have a good relationship with them already, that you can't like gradually get them to, I don't want to like get them. I want to just like actually say things I believe, trying to be like honest and transparent, and not trying to be persuasive, not optimizing strongly for persuasiveness, and just like let them come to me if they want or something. So I think this, yeah, so it's very situation specific. It depends on like the speaker, the audience, the relationship they have, the time you have available, the medium like Twitter versus like many in-person conversations over lunch or whatever. A lot of the time, I think what's best is to figure out what policies would be really helpful, figure out which ones also have a genuinely valid other justification that policymakers already care about. So you're not being manipulative or lying. You're using a reason that isn't your key reason, but it is still like an actual valid justification for this. And you actually have genuine expertise on AI, so you are offering something, and then you like sell them on that policy for that other reason. Maybe you also mention the extreme risk thing as a bonus. Or you find the things that can be sold with something a bit less than like, so you don't have to say like 10 billion years, 10 to the 30 digital minds or something. You can just say like, there's this scenario in which like 10 million people die because of like an issue with the nuclear weapons, or because like we have like lethal autonomous weapons or whatever. There's like some more plausible scenarios that can't get to everyone dead, but can get to like a really bad thing, at least like a few thousand casualties. It's like I think it's very plausible we get a few thousand casualties in some AI incident in the next 5 or 10 years without AGI. That can justify some things that are pretty aligned with what we care about. And so then you sell them for that way. This does still require policymakers like decently farsighted. Another thing is you just like get people to go into policy who already care. And then they like just do a damn good job of their job, and then they have room to like move things in useful directions. I also think increasingly the public's going to wake up, and eventually we can push through these things easier because people are going to sort of notice this stuff. Yeah, it's complicated. That's a quick. That's like a snapshot of my views.
Nice.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Ram. Yeah, I think one of a governance lobbyist I know from the European Union mentioned that, you know, apropos politicians' preferences, that one of the best ways to bond with them was over his interest in soccer. So not necessarily in AI governance there. Let's take a couple of questions from the chat and then jump on to more of the logistics presentation. So there is the question of you've done work on risk estimation, and the question is like, did that lead you to working on AI governance and on this longer-term strategy as a neglected risk? And how does this compare to, for example, technical AI safety work? And how do you look at this, not dichotomy, but these two different categories of work?
Yeah. Okay, so firstly, to get other people up to speed, I'm guessing the main thing that this person has in mind is this post of mine. Which this is how small the field, this is a good example of how small the field is. What I did here is I just found a bunch of places where someone had said an existential risk estimate, and I put them all in a spreadsheet. And there was a little bit more to it than that, but that was pretty much it. And I think it has been very useful, and it's helped a bunch of people. And there's low hanging fruit like that. There's like sort of anyone can wander in and do this. This, yeah, trying to compare. Okay, so one thing is you can compare AI risk to other causes entirely, like biosecurity or nuclear risk or nanotechnology risk or like people dying of malaria or like insect welfare or whatever. Another thing is like when you're focused on AI risk, you can think about like, should I be a field builder or an AI governance person or a technology safety person? And there's also other subdivisions. I think like thinking about and working on existential risk estimates was helpful. It's basically, I mean, the sort of standard EA spiel of like importance, tractability, and neglectedness. You want to focus on like how big the problem is, how easy it is to change it, and how many people are already working on it. And there's like a formal definition by which this like works out nicely. So it's not just, so existential risk estimates are pretty much just the importance piece. They don't tell you tractability or neglectedness. A mix of like estimates of various things by me and by others, as well as like qualitative arguments, as well as a sort of like abstract argument that like focus on the relatively neglected issues and focus on and assume that the market of effective altruism job seekers will be semi-efficient. So there's not going to be like insanely big differences between the things that we care about. If, for example, technical AI safety was way more valuable than AI governance, people are going to somewhat adjust and somewhat like flow in. So basically, all of this put together helped me narrow down to like a few things, including like biosecurity and AI risk. And then I think like among those, they're roughly equally valuable on the margin. For example, I think AI risk is a much bigger deal than biosecurity. There's also way more people working on it, like way more effective altruism type people, in a way that roughly cancels out, I think. And personal fit super important. Like I just would be way less good at technical AI safety. There's other people where the opposite's true. Okay, so that was decently long. The brief version is like my recommendation is just choose which one you're best at. I think they're both about equally good on the margin. And if you thought right now they're not like one's 20% better on the margin, other people might notice and fix that anyway. It's not a perfectly efficient market, but it's like somewhat. So pretty much just like do the thing where you can be like where you might be one of the 20 best people in the field or something like that. Like shooting for where you can like really excel seems great. Also, when you're choosing like, do I work at a think tank or do I work in an EA org or do I work as a grant maker? Again, like personal fit, I would say. It doesn't mean just do whatever. Like, yeah, but once you've narrowed down.
Thank you. And yeah, just the last question, and I'll combine two different ones. Basically, one is, how do you compare the risks of value lock-in versus extinction? So value lock-in being this concept of AI being so powerful that we'll end up being in a state where specific values will stay the same. So for example, we might continue eating animals because there is this risk, versus the extinction of actual humanity, right? And then also someone else asks, you mentioned 1 to 90% extinction risk. Why are we so unsure about this also in this context?
Yeah, okay, so on the second question, so some other people are very confident. There are some people who are like, well, it's like basically this or this range. Usually they think it's either really high or really low, and they feel very confident about that. I think that's silly. I think like in general, the future is pretty hard to predict. Even for something like what job will I be in 2 years? What job will I be in 2 years is kind of hard to predict. Even though I know a lot about myself, it's only 2 years from now and I've got a lot of relevant data. This is a situation in which we're dealing with something that I think is probably more than 10 years away. It's probably something like 10 to 50 years away. It's like decently unprecedented. I think unprecedented is a continuum. Like everything, literally, if you're super fine-grained, everything's kind of unprecedented. But this is like more unprecedented than average. This is like a pretty unusual, weird thing that's happening. The book Super Forecasting by Phil Tetlock goes into this sort of stuff. Yeah, and just empirically, like experts are like crap generally at forecasting geopolitical events 2 years in advance. They're like about as good as random chance, at least in Phil Tetlock's studies. And then even really good forecasters are still like not way better than chance, even just 2 years out. Here's though, so then it gets worse the longer, but at a way that seems to plateau. There's like a little bit of evidence suggesting that like once you get to 10 years, it's not getting much worse as you add another 5 years to your forecasting horizon. So I think we're not just we're not just totally in the dark. We're not just like groping around blindly. This isn't just some crazy thing. This isn't just some sci-fi thing. But I do think it's reasonable to be like pretty unsure in this range. There's just like so many things that could change. Like we don't know how governments are going to act. How we don't know the state of AI progress. Like what type of AI system will it be? When will it be developed? How easy is alignment? We just haven't tested these things. Yeah, this is also a reason why I keep mentioning downside risks. Because I do really want people to enter this field, but at the point we're in, it's like so far from what we're trying to solve, relative to normal problems, like relative to if you're working on like factory farming today, that that we should be wary that it's very hard to predict the consequences of our actions, and therefore a lot of things that kind of seem good at first glance could be negative. I think there's still good things to do. I just think people should be like careful and thoughtful. Very quickly on the first question of like extinction versus value lock-in. I think both are a pretty big deal. I think like a lot of like existential risk type people seem decently confident that extinction is the bigger deal. My independent impression, if I ignore deference to them, is that like value lock-in stuff is like about as big or a bigger deal. This is part of where like long-termism makes more of a difference, as opposed to just like let's make sure we don't all die. Like me being a long-termist increases the extent to which I care about value lock-in. But I think there's a whole bunch of goals that are good across both, like probably slowing down AI progress, making sure the labs are more responsible, making there be sensible regulation at the right time, but not bad regulation too early or whatever. These things are good for it. Just like helps us have conscious, sane, stable ways of handling this rather than like random chance, which is good for both goals.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And amazing talk. Really, really nice to have you. Let's just give him a hand again, and again. It'll be most of us here in the room. I will let you jump off, or just listen, of course, and stop the live stream, and then I will start streaming some of the logistics, and also talk a bit more about these sorts of cases that we're working with, that also relate to some of the problems that you've mentioned. So there will be a little 2-second piece of work here. Oh. Seems like my Google Slides crashed. You are welcome to continue chatting a bit, Michael, while I just fix that.
Well, I'm in the midst of like sharing my slides, so we're both tight.
Ta-da. Perfect. I think we are on the up and up again in just a short moment. Let us see here. Perfect. Alright, I will share my screen here as well. And now you should be able to see the keynote, but now you should see the AI governance ideathon as well. So thank you very much everyone for coming, and it's amazing to have people from across the world. Right now, you know, we are a few here in the Discord or in the keynote here, but tomorrow as well there's a lot of people joining us from across the world, from both India, Vietnam, Brazil, but also from around Stanford, South Bay area, from around Cambridge, London, and Oxford, and of course here in Central Europe with well, this is not Central Europe, this is Northern Europe, in Copenhagen and Aarhus, and also in Paris and Budapest and other places too. We of course recommend that anyone who might be watching only on YouTube join the Discord as well, and keep up to date with all the information we are going to be live updating you with. Otherwise, Otto Barten will take over the scene. I will take any questions now as well, and you are very welcome to just write any questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you very much, Esben, for giving me the stage, and also in general very much for organizing this. I think it's super nice, and I heard a lot of enthusiasm for this jam specifically, but also for in general for the jams that you're organizing. And thanks everyone for being here. I think it's also super cool that you guys are interested in AI safety in general, and definitely also in doing work on these cases. So my name is Otto Barten. I'm the director and the founder of the Existential Risk Observatory. The Existential Risk Observatory is a relatively new non-profit from Amsterdam, and we're reducing existential risk by informing the public debate. So basically, of course, existential risk, people have been trying to reduce existential risks, and especially from AI, for about maybe a few decades, with more traction recently. But something that's strangely neglected is informing the debate about this, and basically communicating to others so they can help solving this. I think right now with ChatGPT and Bing Chat and everything, there's definitely more media attention coming up, but still it's not a mainstream thing in the societal debate that this is also an existential risk. And the idea of the Existential Risk Observatory is that this is negative, and that it would be a lot better if there were broad awareness about existential risk, because then we could solve the problem basically together, which might be more effective. So very concretely, ways in which we expect this to help is first by some kind of regulation. So we think very basically there are two ways to develop technology safely. One is to build it safely, and the other one is to not build it. And very broadly, you can say, okay, of course, there has been a lot of work on AI safety, and especially AI alignment. The idea that, okay, we will go through the intelligence explosion, we will get better and better AI, also vastly better than human cognition, but we will align this so that it will always act in, never against human values. So this is a possibility. And we think if you go for AI alignments, then it still helps to be informed, to keep society informed, For example, for getting more talent, getting more funding, getting a higher number of organizations to work on the topic, getting more diversity and robustness, and more priority within current organizations. But in case AI alignment doesn't work, and I recently saw an interesting poll on manifold markets, where the question was, if we survive general AI, what will be the reason? And about 33% bet on an alignment breakthrough, but 37%, slightly higher number, bet on some kind of humanity coordinates to prevent the creation of potentially unsafe AIs. So some kind of a coordination problem. So while in this space, I think a lot of attention is going to AI alignment, and it's also definitely good. But it might be neglected to also look at regulation options. And for regulation, you might need an informed society. So this is the, in a few words, the thought behind the Existential Risk Observatory. And for this regulation, of course, you would need to have some kind of a regulation proposal. If that was the theory of change or the path to success. And the proposal that we are looking at today is a proposal to slow progress towards AGI or even pause progress towards AGI. So I'll quickly go through the case now. Yeah, so let's assume for the moment, so this is very difficult, of course, right? I mean, I think all these paths are difficult. AI alignment is definitely difficult. Some people have been trying to prove that it's impossible. I'm not 100% convinced by those proofs, but it's definitely difficult technically to fix this. But the other option, a regulatory approach, is, or a combination, of course. There are many combinations of one hand regulatory ideas and on the other hand technical solutions. But if you go for a full regulatory approach, let's say past progress towards AGI, this is very difficult because you would need to have global coordination. You would probably need to have a fully informed societal debate, which is what we're working on, but it's definitely not the case yet. So it's difficult to get this passed. But right now we're thinking, which is also why there is no existing regulation proposal, to my knowledge, that is really serious about pausing progress towards AGI. So it's a little bit out of the overtone window, but that's also very interesting, I think, to work on at a hackathon. You can let your ideas roam free and hopefully end up with something original and interesting and potentially, I think, influential in the future. So it's difficult, but let's assume for the moment that we have full political support, full international support. What policy could successfully pause global progress towards artificial general intelligence? And we kind of assume here that artificial general intelligence looks a bit like GPT-4 plus or something. I'm not sure how realistic this is, but this is what we have in mind for this this proposal, at least. So you would look probably at least a part of it would be a large language model. So proposals, they may include research regulation, software regulation, data regulation, and or hardware production regulation. So these are all different ways in which you might be able to pause progress towards AGI. So you can consider the full supply chain to be yours. And a few proposals have been made already. You can, maybe I'll go through the criteria as well. So, well, what we think is interesting, or what we think is important, is that the proposal should be robust. So, of course, no one should be able to build AGI, but this is very non-trivial because, of course, there are also hackers. There's the open source community, etc. Are we also certain that those people, we can, of course, regulate companies, and they might be able to actually follow this regulation, but there are also unofficial actors. So these should be included in the regulation. It should be very robust. We should be certain that no one can build AGI, even though we don't specifically know what AGI looks like, but we are supposing that a large language model is at least part of it. Future-proofness. So right now we're seeing still growth in hardware capability, not quite Moore's law, but there's definitely still growth. So do you think that the proposal would still hold with 10x or 100x better hardware? Enforceability is this policy solution that institutions can practically enforce. Implementability, how well have you detailed the implementation? Have you thought about how it would actually get implemented? The damage should be minimal. It's relatively easy to come up with a proposal that's very robust, but with extremely high economic damage. And actually, I myself played with one of these proposals. Why don't we just go back to the hardware capability of the 90s? Pretty sure no one can build AGI. However, large economic damage, pretty outside the overtone window and difficult to implement. But this is still actually one of the extreme proposals. But you can be original for sure here. But one of the criteria should also be to have minimal economic damage and minimal damage in general in society. I'm also looking for legal proposals. Maybe that's also so. Some people say throwing atomic bombs on, but we're not going into that. As simple as possible, but no simpler. Often used quote by Albert Einstein. I think that's also the case here. I would say it's similar to when you're coding. When you're coding, you say, okay, I want to have high genericness, high robustness, but basically everything should be in one line of code. And I think good regulation should also look like this. That is basically one sentence, but you know that everything is in it, and you've thought of all the weird edge cases and possibilities that people might abuse it. And it is very robust, but it's still simple. That's very beautiful, I think. And level of detail. Notwithstanding this, the regulation itself should be as simple as possible, but you should have thought about all the consequences. So the better the idea is worked out, the better it is. So there are a few proposals that have been promoted, but it's a very empty space, which is, I think, exactly why this is an interesting case. But there have been a few proposals, and I've just filed those on the resources. So two sketchy policy proposals expressed by Matthew Iglesias, and probably before that from the space. So there's two links there. One is to his blog post. It's behind the paywall, so there's also a secret Google Doc file where you can find the information. That's an interesting proposal. Just give it a read and see whether you would like to work out this proposal. If you want to work out some of the existing proposals, that's very fine. If you want to come up with something new entirely, that's also great. Whatever you feel has the best chance of actually getting implemented. There's an old proposal by Jan Tallinn. He's hinting there at a policy proposal. By email, he said that he observed that if there was sufficient motivation on regulator side, it would be possible to limit compute concentration. So let's say flops per square kilometer of a data center, or of all data centers globally, technically. So this could be the core of a proposal. This is something that he has proposed. Maybe not super seriously, but it's definitely an interesting one to look at. And I think we should also look at software or research regulation. Some people say that research regulation or software regulation would only push progress underground because you cannot maintain it for hackers or the open source community. And that's, of course, that's a minus for these proposals. But then again, some really do believe in research proposals or research regulation or software regulation. So if you think that you have a great proposal here, like Elon Musk, for example, in the resources, do give it a shot and do try to work it out. And we will just judge it by the criteria above. Another one is something related to trusted platform computing. It's kind of interesting that in the past, the music industry had the issue that their music was pirated by torrent websites, etc. And what they proposed is just put software within the hardware, that the hardware is only able to run the software that we agree to, so to have very robust defense against pirated music. That has never happened. However, we can see a similar idea perhaps working for AI. This is all kinds of upsides and downsides as well, but I leave those mostly to you. And I also made a small overview of these proposals and a few others, and that's in a spreadsheet in the link, so you can also take a look there. Don't take it too literally, it's very sketchy. If you can come up with something better, just please do so. But it is maybe interesting to take a look at the overview as well. And again, you're very welcome to make a better proposal than those existing ones, but you're also very welcome to join on one, to work on one of those. So thanks a lot for that. And if there are any questions, maybe I can go over them now, or otherwise we can also move on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Otto. One of the points Otto also went into was that of course, you can take things from the internet, and whatever fits the criteria best will be rewarded. And in that spirit, you are of course also very welcome to use GPT-4 or use Claude and ChatGPT and so on. I think as long as you understand it yourself, and of course, this is sort of a vague criterion, but the best stuff is gonna win. So if we are at the forefront of AI, then it's a pretty good idea to also use that ability. Otherwise, massive thank you to Otto and to our judges and to Michael as well. And we can probably just give them a hand to, Perfect.